Welcome, fellow nerds, geeks, and aficionados of the dark and mysterious. I'm Hal Hefner, your guide through the realms of nerd horror. Ever wondered how brains can defeat the most terrifying monsters, or how the nerdiest villains conjure chaos? Then join me on the Nerd Horror Podcast, where we dive deep into the spine-tingling stories of heroes and villains who wield intellect as their deadliest weapon.
It's alive!
It's time to enter the world of nerd horror, where you'll be chilled, thrilled, and enlightened as we explore how brains triumph over brawn in horror.
Horror. Horror. Horror. Horror. Horror. Horror.
You're listening to the Nerd Horror Podcast, a podcast dedicated to discussing an overlooked genre of horror, where nerds rule the narrative, from the darkness or the light. I am your host, Hal Hefner, artist, writer, filmmaker, marketing strategist, and nerd. This is episode 1. In this episode, we're going to talk about something very dear to me, which is how nerd horror saved my life, and how I came to understand what it was and realize that it was something that needed our attention. Like you, I'm a lifelong horror fan. I grew up in a very small town in upstate New York called Mohawk. It's the place where James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohegans took place. So it was old and had a history of bloodshed. And that town, in particular, really molded me into the horror fan that I am because of its age and because of the interesting ghost stories and things that surrounded the town because it was so old. I also lived across the street from a cemetery that was very creepy, and I could see from my window. So it was kind of inevitable that horror was something that I was going to have to deal with, no matter what. But for as long as I've been a horror fan, I've also been a nerd. My dad was an English teacher who wore a pocket protector, so I really had no chance. But the great thing about that is when your dad's a nerd and your dad's an English teacher, that means you get a lot of good books. So I started off reading classics like Frankenstein, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and then I stumbled upon something probably way too early, a book by Stephen King called Night Shift that was filled with all these short stories that would later become some of his most prized novels and greatest movies. As a kid, I was also really engulfed in TV. Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, and then 80s and 90s classics such as Tales from the Dark Side, Freddy's Nightmares, Monsters, and of course, Tales from the Crypt. And then movies. Movies really shaped me as well as a horror fan. From the crazy vampire in Salem's Lot to the disturbing sex scene in The Howling. And horror films with Vincent Price on Saturday afternoons and Boris Karloff and all those classics. Those really shaped me as a child and really guided me towards horror. But growing up as a connoisseur of horror, I couldn't get enough. So when the movies ended, they continued in my mind. And I would write stories, I would create all sorts of interesting pieces of art that would reflect these things that I loved. And as a child and a teenager, I became obsessed with drawing aliens, monsters, creatures, and all these other weird things that made my teachers say, "Is there something wrong with this kid?" So I decided to take that and focus on going to art school, because I wanted to tell stories with that art. So I went to art school at the Pratt Institute of Art and Munson Williams, which was a program that taught me fine art and the foundation of everything that I would use to go on to RIT in Rochester, New York, to get a degree in illustration. It was there where I was able to focus more on the characters and creatures and things that I loved in the illustration program, as opposed to the Fine Art Foundation, which gave me the basis of color theory and all those things that I would apply to all the illustrations that I was creating. So it was a wonderful mix of art that I needed to tell my stories. So when I graduated, I realized, hey, there's not really much here in New York for me. So I packed up my car with everything that I had, and I took off to LA to chase my dreams and make comics and games and animation and anything that I could that was sci-fi and horror related. As a lifelong fan of films, animation, and games, that's all I wanted to do. But when I got to LA, illustration was a bit challenging because it was just freelance. You don't have stable art jobs that you used to. There's some in the entertainment industry for sure, but everything's kind of freelance right now. So, in order to pay the bills, I became a graphic designer in the entertainment advertising space. In a way, this was the beginning of how I would find myself working on major campaigns for movies and films and TV and all these wonderful things. So what I did here was I got in on the ground floor as a designer, and then I worked my way up, because what happened is people realized that I was more than just a designer, that I could see things, I could frame shots, I could, all this illustration stuff that I had learned and all the writing that I had done was starting to pay off. And then I found myself working on major films. While that was taking off, the day job, I was still pursuing a career as an illustrator, and I was doing side jobs and weekend gigs and nights. And so pretty much my day was at least a 12-hour day filled with design by day, art by night, and that paid off because I partnered up with Heavy Metal Magazine to create Gates, Heavy Metal's first webcomic, with Kevin Eastman, who was the creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. From there, my art career took off, and I soon launched Consume, a pop art series inspired by John Carpenter's 80s cult science fiction horror film, They Live. They Live has always been a wonderful, wonderful inspiration to me because I saw the world with those glasses on, and I saw people as aliens. And so it was second nature to me to create people in the cultural zeitgeist that were those aliens. Because from the moment I saw that movie as a kid, I realized, hey, that Madonna's an alien. Hey, Elvis is an alien. Hey, Ronald Reagan's an alien. Bill Clinton's an alien. All these people around us that were feeding us some type of either propaganda from pop culture or public figures were all these aliens. So I had a little fun. I made Kim Kardashian as one of the They Live aliens, and my art took off. And it resonated with millions of people around the world. And I had no idea that this would happen. Soon I found myself showing my art in London and in France, and people were requesting prints and all these other different illustrations of people from Donald Trump to Steve Jobs to Bill Cosby. It was crazy, but it was fun. And then in 2016, I found myself and my art at the Glastonbury Festival, where they took a whole section of the festival and built it around the themes that my art was talking about, which was consumerism and materialism, all of the things that echoed in John Carpenter's film. What was great about that is literally my art was sitting right above Banksy and Shepard Fairey. It was a wild ride, and I'm so grateful that it happened. And it's really taken off, and it's a humbling experience that's really helped put me here in front of you today. But while my art was thriving, so was my day job. Because as I had mentioned before, people started noticing that I could write and do more than just the things that they had hired me to do. So from design, I started transitioning into writing, strategy, and creative direction. What I was doing was creating content for social media and all around 360 campaigns for films, TV, games, and even experiential exhibits for various Comic-Cons and more. It was a hell of a ride, and I learned so much, and I basically faked it until I made it, which is pretty much how I've done everything in my life. And that's what I'm doing right here in front of you today, because I love to talk about horror, and I really feel like this nerd horror genre is something that you need to know about. So, I digress. We'll get back to that. From there, I ended up working at a wonderful company called Fourth Wall Studios, where I worked on some properties that really at the forefront of technology and entertainment. And while I was there, we won an Emmy for an interactive series called Dirty Work. From there, I moved on to Ignition, which was a entertainment marketing agency that had just come off of working on Ridley Scott's Prometheus campaign and really set the bar for what it was to create stories that were marketing. And that's what my real goal was. I didn't want to make just marketing. I wanted to tell stories that didn't feel like marketing for people like me because I'm a fan. And the type of content that I wanted to make was for fans, by fans. At Ignition, I got to work on some of the most amazing marketing campaigns in the last 20 years of the entertainment industry, such as X-Men Days of Future Past. And that really allowed me to grow and think and see things in a different way, which allowed me to go off on my own and create an alternate reality game called The Brotherhood of the Snake. This game I created was living and breathing online, hiding for about a year, and then Google reached out to me and purchased it and incorporated it into something that they were building for a series of books and movies by James Fry called Endgame. After I sold The Brotherhood of the Snake to Google, I had a wonderful opportunity in front of me where I was able to join Ridley Scott's marketing company, 3AM. This was an experience that basically changed my life, and under the guidance of Ridley Scott and a talented team of marketers, writers, and creatives, I was able to work on the Martian campaign from start to finish, which was so valuable in showing me how to not only create a franchise, but to create story and marketing elements that really can blow people away and really get people excited about a property before it even comes out. We also worked on Tim Burton's Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children and Morgan, which was a horror film starring Anna Taylor-Joy, one that kind of slid under the radar but was really good. From there, I joined DeviantArt as their creative director and strategist and got to work on some amazing properties for Blizzard, launching Overwatch, and I really learned a ton about community, fandom, and so much more. It allowed me to learn so much and really appreciate something that I had been doing all along but wasn't clearly aware of. I was making content with a for fans, by fans strategic approach because that's what I am. I'm a fan, and I like to make content for people like me. I want to take marketing and make it story so it doesn't feel like marketing because that's what fans want. Fans don't want to be marketed to, they want to be storied to. So that's what I did, and I was able to turn that into my own consulting company called Cat Monkey. From here, I worked as a consultant for every single major studio you could think of and had a reputation, and still do, for a person that you call to build deep story and deep fan activation. Because of my background at DeviantArt, because of my background at 3AM and Ignition, it allowed me to really take all those things that I had learned and apply it to a number of different properties. Netflix, HBO, Amazon Studios, Showtime, Disney, Universal, Hulu, and so much more. Those were my major clients that I worked on all sorts of properties for, such as The Witcher, Unsolved Mysteries, The Righteous Gemstones, Peacemaker, Titans, Doom Patrol, and Harley Quinn. All that nerd stuff I got to help launch, including The Boys, The Wheel of Time, Lord of the Rings. I also got to work on Loki, Animaniacs, and then this second season of Yellow Jackets, and I just finished up a gig for the new movie Five Nights at Freddy's, which I got to read the script, and it's awesome. So I'm really excited about this film. I think it's going to be much better than people are anticipating. So as things were humming along with my marketing career, I was in the midst of working on the campaign for Harley Quinn Season 3 when my life changed forever. On May 31st, 2022, I lived through my very own horror movie. On a normal night, like any other, my 6-year-old son and I were walking our dog. As we walked down the street, an unhoused man, whacked out of his mind on drugs, jumps out of the bushes and threatens to kill my son, and attacked us for no reason. I was able to send my son running home to safety, but I had to hold the man off so he could not find out where we lived, as he continued to threaten me and chase me and told me he was going to kill my family. In a barrage of racist slurs and incoherent drug-related delusional rants, he called me a demon over and over and over. I called 911, and while on the phone, he attacked me with several tools he pulled from a gardener's truck parked on our street, including 2 rakes and a shovel, and he stole my phone when I dropped it. I did all I could to have compassion. I tried to reason with him. I tried not to fight back, but I just wanted to escape and move on. But this relentless monster would not stop. Whacked out on drugs, he had no idea what he was doing, and he attacked me. He bull rushed me. He twisted my ankle. He smashed my tailbone, and I lost my dog. As he began to tweak out, I was able to escape and hide behind a truck in front of my house. My kids were watching from the window as he found another truck filled with tools. This time, he pulled out a pair of sharp garden shears and started opening and closing them over and over again and laughing demonically. As he pulled out those shears, I knew this was it. I was in trouble. And he looked at me and said, "I'm gonna cut your dick off." Immediately, the scene changed. That was a Freddy Krueger one-liner.
How sweet, fresh meat.
Something clicked right then and there, because I knew this was it. I had to fight for my life, and as I saw my kids behind me, I was not going to go down like this. I had to fight back. Something clicked, and I felt like Nancy Thompson. That's who flashed into my mind. Freddie and Nancy. And I saw her making the homemade bombs right then and there. And it flashed through my mind so quickly, and I knew I had to act.
Come on, Freddy. Can't you catch me?
I'm gonna split you in two.
I was not going to die at the hands of this racist, evil piece of shit. So, he threatened to kill my dog to lure me out because I would not come out. And as he attacked my dog, I looked in a truck in front of me, which was another gardener's truck parked on my street, and I grabbed a shovel. And so I proceeded to fight off his attacks with the shovel. I swung it like a baseball bat, and I was dialed in, and every time he attacked, I swung. I was able to hit him a couple of times, but he also was so whacked out of his mind that it did nothing to him. He had this drug-induced adrenaline flowing, and he was trying to kill me. And he voiced that over and over. As I began to think like Nancy, I realized that things were slowing down and that I was more in control of everything. I fought valiantly, and I broke the shears, and I hit him good. And I tried and tried and tried to stop the whole thing. But he picked up the shears that were broken in pieces on the ground and threw them at me, which stabbed me in the back, and then he stabbed me with the other one in the hand. during that final altercation, when he cut my hand, I dropped the shovel, which was a huge mistake because he immediately picked up the shovel and hit me in the head with it 4 times. As blood dripped down my head, I was able to scamper behind a construction dumpster that was placed across the street from my house to hide. I screamed for help because I knew that this man was not going to stop. And I thought of different options of what I could do next. But I was bleeding and hurt. And so I was not ready to go down, but I also knew I was in bad shape. So I started screaming for help. Luckily, my neighbor came out and distracted him. And as this happened, he ran down the street and the police came at the same time. That night, we ID'd him. The police got him after they found him in a tree screaming for Jesus. And after months of court dates and doctor's appointments and rehab, they put him away. And from there, life changed. PTSD isn't something that you think about when you're a kid. It's a real life horror that a lot of people deal with. And it's hard to understand until you go through it yourself. And while some images from that night still haunt me, I survived. And I'm able to tell this tale to you now because of it. And as I mentioned, things have really changed. My art and drawing, it's hard now because my hands haven't really healed. And so I'm dealing with constant pain, especially in both of my thumbs and 2 fingers. But at the same time, this incident was a blessing in disguise, because as I began to process the events of that night, I began to process my existence on this planet. As I recovered, I wrote a post on Facebook, and I gave credit to Wes Craven's films and my upbringing in upstate New York for saving my life. One of my friends, who's an editor at IndieWire magazine, saw the post and was intrigued by what I had said. Because when I gave credit to Wes Craven, she saw something there that maybe I didn't even see at the time. But she wanted me to tell that story. And so I credit my friend for bringing this out. Because when I wrote this article for IndieWire magazine, it really changed everything and allowed me to have this shift. And so this helped me to contemplate life as a whole. This helped me to see what was right in front of me. Wes Craven and his film Nightmare on Elm Street truly did save my life, because I survived by instincts and grit while using my brain to create a plan on my feet with what I had in front of me. Just like Nancy, just like in a nerd horror movie. Now, a little over a year later, I've recovered, but as I mentioned, the scars still remain, and they always will. But my brain has really picked up the slack, and I've been writing and thinking in ways I never thought I could have. All the fear I had of doing things and taking big risks are gone. This is why I stand before you today, because I'm refocusing all my creative energy that I've given to all these different things on nerd horror. So you may ask, well, what the hell is nerd horror? I've talked about it a lot. I've hinted at it. What the hell is it? Nerd horror is an already existing but overlooked genre. Many of your favorite films are likely examples of nerd horror, and you may not even realize it. Nerds are not new to horror. In fact, nerds rule horror, and they always have. They've been the stars of the genre since its inception. They have just never been collectively recognized until now. Nerd horror is when the hero of a story is a nerd or outcast who uses their knowledge as a weapon to defeat the horror that confronts them. Some obvious examples of these types of films are Stephen King's It, and a series like Stranger Things.
Why are you guys anyway?
We're sort of a club. Yeah, the Losers Club.
Yeah.
Nerd horror can also apply to villains of a story who are nerds or outcasts, who use their brains as a tool to create the terror others must defeat. Two classic examples of these types of films are Frankenstein and Reanimator, both starring mad scientists with big brains and big egos to match.
What have you done in here?
We created a life.
You made her?
Yes. Dead pieces of this. With my hands, I created what no man's mind or woman's womb could ever hope to achieve.
Nerd horror is growing, as more and more horror stories embrace the brain over brawn types of characters because they are more relatable to the average human being. It makes sense because nerd culture has been extremely successful in other forms of entertainment. So now it's time for the nerds of horror to get their due with a genre all to their own. Nerd horror is a new path for me, and hopefully a new path for you, because I'm dedicated to the past, the present, the future, stories that are out there that I consider to be nerd horror. So, I'm going to talk about this in this podcast. It's going to focus on films, TV, streaming content, books, anything and everything that has to do with nerd horror, and also the nerds of horror. The people that are nerds that make the films. The people that are nerds that write the films, the production departments, and all these things, I really want to focus on as much as possible to reveal the world of horror from a nerd's perspective. So I'll be releasing a bunch of new art and fun social content around the nerd horror theme to support the podcast. New episodes will drop every Tuesday, and I'm also in pre-production on my first nerd horror film, which I'm writing and directing with a talented team of amazing people. So thank you for your time. I'm your host, Hal Hefner, artist, writer, filmmaker, and nerd. Please join me for more nerd horror coming soon. Until next time, keep it creepy and keep it nerdy.
Horror. 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 Horror.